is a podcast from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Welcome back to the Morning Run. It's 8:36 a.m. with me, Rich Bradbury and Keith Cam. In about half an hour, we have the opening bell. We'll be checking out how Bursa Malaysia begins the trading day. But before all of that, let's talk about the haze and the challenges in tackling it. If the skies look a little different this morning and yesterday, haze, of course, could be the reason. Air quality has deteriorated in parts of Malaysia, with the air pollution index reaching unhealthy levels. It's 182 in Serian, in Sarawak, and 152 in Johan Setia here in Selangor.
Yeah, I can attest to that with my voice as well. Because
Mine too.
haze has been a recurring problem in Southeast Asia since the 1970s, despite regional efforts such as the 1997 Regional Haze Action Plan. So why has it been so difficult to prevent these episodes from happening again and again, and where do the gaps remain in the current approach?
Okay, to help us understand some of the challenges, we'll be speaking with Dr. Helena Vaki, Associate Professor of Political Ecology at the University of Malaya. Good morning, Helena. Thank you so much for joining us. I do apologize for the way our voices sound this morning, but I'm sure a lot of people around the Klang Valley and elsewhere are feeling pretty much the same, because Malaysia is seeing unhealthy air quality in parts of Sarawak and Selangor, with hot and dry conditions, of course, expected to continue for the rest of this week. What are the main factors driving the current haze situation?
Yes, thanks for having me. Good morning. So this year is projected to be a super El Nino year, which means warmer and drier conditions across the region compared to normal El Nino years. And we've previously had this kind of super El Ninos in 1997 and 2015, which of course you will remember were also big haze years. So these warmer and drier conditions, they increase the risk of accidental fires. They also worsen intentional fires, and they make it harder for people to put these fires out because of limited rainfall and also limited water supplies. So this could be similar reasons why we're having haze now as well.
So why does the recurrence of this trans-boundary haze tell us about the effectiveness of environmental governance in Southeast Asia? I mean, as you mentioned, that it's happened before, and we've been preempted the fact that it is going to be a super El Nino year as well.
Yeah, so there's definitely the awareness there. It's not a lack of awareness. And there definitely isn't a lack of environmental governance in the region either. So what I think it tells us is that we are still, as a region, struggling with balancing between these economic priorities and sort of the social and environmental safeguards and priorities as well. For haze, this has always been related to land use. There are laws across the region to govern things like land conversion, things like fire prevention. But of course, we have our really old stories like patronage, corruption, and this still tends to get into the way of proper enforcement of that laws.
I want to pick up on that then, Helena, because we've had haze and it's persisted here in Southeast Asia for decades, despite ASEAN agreements and initiatives, as you mentioned, including the Regional Haze Action Plan. But how effective are these mechanisms in ensuring accountability?
Yeah, so there's actually been so many mechanisms related to ASEAN level haze cooperation as well. We have detailed roadmaps when it comes to prevention. We have SOPs to tell us exactly what we should do when haze breaks out. And this has all been agreed on a regional level. But as you say, the accountability remains an issue. So even though all countries in ASEAN has signed up, they have agreed to these agreements and all, there are no punitive measures actually. So if a national commitment, countries have committed to doing certain things, it's voluntary. If they don't fulfill them, nothing actually happens. And in terms of emergency assistance, which is really important, and countries are capable of offering this emergency assistance, it cannot actually be automatically activated no matter how bad the situation is without explicit invitation from the host country. So this makes response really difficult as well.
I think you've just answered the next question. I was going to ask you about the key gaps in the region's current approach to managing all these. But the thing is, it sounds like they just sat down there and made decisions, and they were decisions that had no action plan to it. What reforms are needed then going forward?
Yeah, so I think you have banged on the head of the issue here, the decision-making process. So I would like to highlight the actual priorities that come into play with decision-making process in ASEAN. So I believe a key gap is we don't have science-based decision-making. Decision-making is on Haze, is based on politics, is based on diplomacy. Decisions are taken to save face, to maintain cordial relations. So I really think what we need is something like a scientific committee at the ASEAN level where we could depoliticize the Haze decision-making and take decisions on scientific data alone. So for example, now something that's really difficult to agree upon, which preempts further action, is things like validating data. Is Haze really a big enough problem? Are the hotspots actually there? So this kind of stuff, if we just debate about it on a diplomatic level, is going to be really difficult to take action. So things like this, or even decisions to activate response teams, this should be taken on the scientific basis. But of course, this would require the member states to give up a bit of their sovereignty, which will be difficult in an ASEAN context.
What about if we looked at it from a health level as well, Helena? You know, if you look at not just the health, but how it's affecting the economy, we rely a lot on grab riders and delivery drivers who are out in this haze all the time, as do Indonesia and other surrounding countries. Wouldn't that be enough of a strong arm to kind of convince the people in power that this is having an effect on our economy?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that is continuously an issue, and people who are living on the ground, they are facing the realities of it every day. But I think the problem is, if I go back a bit to the issues about patronage and priorities on a larger scale, when governments make decisions based on, not so much national interest, but maybe elite interests, as we know, this then becomes a problem where the priorities of the society takes a backseat. So actually, Haze is systemic. It affects the whole economy. And I think something that we tend to forget is that when Haze happens, it actually raises the cost of doing business across the board.
Right.
When Grab riders, they have to take leave, when they're not able to go to work, when they need to spend more money buying medicines. That also affects the big businesses as well. And when Malaysia no longer becomes an environment that is good for business, it will affect things like investments. It will affect things like Malaysia being a good expat destination. So it moves throughout the economy like this.
I mean, to your point earlier about ASEAN, I can't help thinking that ASEAN is pretty much useless when it comes to this. Just sit around and pat each other on the back for jobs well done. But I'm quite keen to know about Singapore's more proactive approach to transboundary haze, including introducing this Transboundary Haze Pollution Act in 2014. Has that made any sort of a dent, and is this something that we can learn from this experience?
Yeah, so the Singapore's Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, to me, I think it has been a very good deterrence tool. It has sent a signal to the corporations that, look, there is something that will happen if you are not becoming too serious. Even though practically it has not actually been successful in prosecuting anyone yet. But I do believe there has been an effect. Singaporean companies have been really stepping up. So Malaysia was considering a act in the past, but they sort of backed down because it created some sort of sensitivities between Singapore and Indonesia at the time. I feel that it would actually be good for Malaysia to reopen looking at this possibility, but with some modifications. So with the Singapore Act, one of the flashpoints was that it was extraterritorial. So it means that technically it also covers non-Singaporean entities. So it made the neighbors a bit nervous. So for Malaysia, I feel that if a Malaysian Act, a similar one, but only limited to Malaysian entities, would have this similar deterrence effect without the diplomatic baggage that came into play the first time around.
Helena, how do you think governments should prepare for the economic costs of the health and the other impacts? I mean, if we look at stuff like tourism, aviation, these are obviously exposed, but we look at construction, agriculture, other outdoor industries. Do you think government should begin treating haze as a predictable economic and fiscal risk rather than, an occasional environmental, emergency?
Yeah, that is something really big when we talk about haze as a problem, whether it is a consistent problem or whether it is a seasonal problem. It is seasonal in the sense that it's only a few months in the year. but it is consistent in the sense that it keeps coming back. So indeed, the Malaysian government should start thinking about it in this way. So things like, making sure there's enough masks that's available, making sure the prices of masks are controlled, making sure that there are arrangements for working from home that is automatic. These all should be put into place, and it should be a policy that is immediately applicable as soon as Haze happens. So because of the predictability, because of the regularity, actually we can be much more prepared.
And I guess the follow-up question to that then is, who should ultimately bear the cost if the pollution can be traced to commercial activity?
Well, it should definitely be the corporations who are causing the problem. And actually, it's a bit more complicated than that, because in the past few years, there definitely has been an improvement of on-the-ground activity. Corporations are more careful, but the fact that they are on landscapes that are fire-prone, it makes it very difficult to entirely block out the possibility of fires. So corporations, they should really just step up their sustainability measures, step up their prevention measures to make it really, to reduce the threat of fire completely. But when it comes to who should bear the cost, I think it's very much something corporations and governments should work really closely together. The government has a responsibility to the people, to be a good government, to take care of the interests of the people. Of course, the economy has to go, the economy has to build and expand, but it should not be at the expense of people's well-being.
Helena, you mentioned corporations, but whenever these things happen, it's always the plantation companies that end up being blamed whenever haze happens, because the reasons are always the same every single time, right? Clearing of land, etc. Who else should shoulder the responsibility?
Also, consumers, we have a role to play as consumers. When we want to buy certain products, it is good for us to be aware of who we are supporting with our dollars. If we know that certain companies are more sustainable, certain companies are more careful about their practices and their relationships with the communities that live around them, these are the people who we should support. And if we know that there are certain companies that have been involved in not so good activities, we should put our dollars where our money is, our dollars where our mouth is. So in that way, if the consumers become more aware, the companies, they are profit motivated, and if they feel that their profits are being at risk, then there will be an added incentive, not just legal incentive, but there will also be sort of practical profit incentives to clean their act up and be more careful on the ground.
Helena, I've got one last question, a quick one. I mean, we've got much better satellite monitoring and hotspot detection than we did during the major haze crisis of the 1990s. If governments can increasingly see where the fires are, why is identifying and holding those responsible still so difficult?
Yeah, it's a bit complicated. We do have more advanced technology, but there are still limitations just because of where we are. In this part of the world, there's a lot of cloud coverage, so satellite imagery is not very reliable. And so that is one primary problem. There's not a ground truthing that needs to be done. And of course, because of all of these connections and because of all of these relationships, there are interests to be taken care of as well. And sometimes it is really difficult for justice to prevail.
Helena, thank you so much for your time this morning. That was Dr. Helena Varkey, Associate Professor of Political Ecology at the University of Malaya. Up next, we'll discuss what to expect from the DAP's 60th Anniversary Congress. Stay tuned to BFM 80.